Hello, I am Conrad Leiva, Director of Ecosystem and Workforce Development at CESMII. Today's presentation is part of CESMII's virtual annual member meeting and is part 2 of my presentation on EWD. If you missed one of these great presentations, check them out at the annual event page at CESMII.org. Let's take a minute to read the antitrust statement. And the rest of my panelists can go ahead and turn their cameras on if they want, as everybody's reading the antitrust statement. We're missing one panelist, but I'm sure he. And so today, I want to, in my last presentation, I talked about the educational content framework and the layers required for knowledge on smart manufacturing and the specific areas where CESMII is going to focus on. Today's presentation, we will highlight on the transformational service required to accelerate adoption among business leaders and innovation champions. More specifically, the presenters today will share the results of some pilot activities we perform with manufacturers to help us identify and validate how transformational services could help accelerate their initiatives. Our presenters today include Jim Wetzel and Doug Berger from Nextgen. Doug, let me see, maybe, there we go. So Jim Wetzel and Doug Berger from co-founders of the NxGen Group, and Chris Damsgard, Principal Engineer on Global Reliability at General Mills. We will also have in the background Mike Yost will be helping us with the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Jim, go ahead and get us started.
So good afternoon, everybody. Jim Wetzel here. And, you know, when CESMII came to me and said, boy, we'd like you to dig into this topic of how can we add more value to our members and how can we accelerate and democratize smart manufacturing, I saw this quote to Nelson Mandela, and it rung true to me, you know, is that things always seem impossible until you actually get them done. And what I'm going to share with you today is, you know, how we go from this concept of I don't even know what I'm kind of going after or what might be possible or not possible to a very concrete set of capabilities and services that we piloted and found a lot of value in. And so I know this information had been hinted at in Conrad's earlier presentation of the annual meeting. So now it's great to get a chance to actually talk about what we accomplished during this pilot. Slide, there we go. So what was the pilot? We were hired to, oh, excuse me. Yeah, that's right. We were hired to really take a look at how CESMII could provide differential value to all of its members by offering services that would accelerate their journey in smart manufacturing. We wanted to then pilot that list of services in limited mode with some specific members that were friendly members that were willing to say, you know what, sure, we'd love to practice and love to provide feedback around how well those services went. And then ultimately we wanted to provide feedback to CESMII about, okay, if services and capability are being brought to the members, how can this grow and evolve and additional partners be brought into the ecosystem of CESMII and still be a win-win for CESMII, a win for the members and a win for the external partners. And when we talk about the partners, we don't want to exclude our technology partners as well. So the very first part in this identify differential value was really around our industry members. This fourth bullet point is really around differential value for technology partners, and I'll talk more about that as well. And then ultimately, the goal of providing these wonderful services and this capability for folks to really accelerate and democratize smart manufacturing is CESMII is hopeful that that will accelerate membership, right, and sustain the members that they have, and also develop a scalable and sustainable approach that provides a healthy CESMII and a healthy ecosystem to work in. So those are kind of the goals, and that's why you kind of think about this Nelson Mandela quote, is it seems impossible until it's done, and we didn't know exactly where we're going. So we're going to tell you a little bit about the journey. For some reason my mouse is not advancing the slide. Let's try it. There we go. So first of all, let's tell you a little bit about who this NxGen Group is. Obviously, you know that I used to be the interim CEO of CESMII, and before that, Director of Engineering at General Mills. When I left CESMII, created this virtual boutique of industry experts. Our group, our company name is NxGen Group. We're an LLC, and we're focused on really helping manufacturers out, breaking through this parallelization that might happen or might occur in smart manufacturing. How do you understand what capabilities your organization needs to go on this digital transformation? All of us have been whacked in the head recently by COVID-19 and the implications of the virus and shutdowns of businesses, etc. And I think there's a new day where people are very thirsty for understanding how do they can keep in business in this crazy world that we now live in, and how can digital transformation really help us, and how do we take advantage of the new work structure, this remote worker, the educated worker, all of the transitions that are happening. And so we formed NextGen to help organizations do that. Conrad, you might have to be assisting me here because I doesn't seem to go. And so when we started surveying the folks out there, kind of these statements just kind of kept popping up. I get it, nobody listens to me, the technology's not ready, what problem am I solving, should I buy versus build? This open CESMII innovation platform, how does it fit with the infrastructure? Is this a game changer that I need to pay attention to, or is this just a blowing in the wind kind of thing that ultimately I'll catch up to? I don't even know how to start. Is my project getting approved? There's all this, the theme of kind of this common issue stuff is doubt. It's you're questioning, you're uncertain, you're not sure. It's all about doubt. And given the fact that you have a world that you live in right now that was, and prior to the virus, was pretty darn certain. Conrad, next, there we go. And so one of the things we did was take a look at what are some of the pitfalls and what are some of the things that were going on already, and how can CESMII and how can services be differential for you? So stepping back and kind of looking in the mirror, you see these things on the left-hand side that really are kind of trying to talk to what are the pitfalls and what are the approaches that are happening in the marketplace and in industry. So the first kind of item is that, everyone's talking about digital transformation, which really means you're going to become data-driven. Yet at the same time, most people have not accomplished that. So you can look at the stats in the white, and you'd say, well, why aren't people becoming data-driven? They want to be. And the answer is not technology. The answer is people. So look over on the far right, it says people, process, and technology. 63% of the challenges to become data-driven rely on people, only 7% in technology. On the next line, digital technology is not just a thing to buy and plug in. The lack of ownership, the lack of adoption comes from, look at the right, biggest challenge to business adoption, lack of organizational alignment and agility, cultural resistance, understanding the data as an asset, and executive leadership. Again, it's not technology. This is about how people are becoming all in to your digital transformation and the digital journey. Are you ready? The digital readiness of your industry. Are you actually ready to do this? And the answer is, people are saying the pace of investment is accelerating. But if you look in the middle, what's your internal maturity and what's the maturity of the people ahead and behind you? So you might be ready for a digital transformation and journey, but those around you and those in your ecosystem may not be. And the last thing and lessons learned from our survey is remain calm. And the idea here is that this fear of disruption, this data was taken before COVID. So people already were uncertain about what is digital and what is this smart manufacturing, what is this connective thread, what does it mean? And you read brochures, you get marketing material, you get vendor information, all of that kind of stuff. And my message there is remain calm. This stuff is real, but you'll get through it and you'll be able to deal with it. But I thought these are pretty interesting facts, about at the end of the day, it's important to have technology. It's important to be enabled, but at the same time, it's not the largest thing. It's all about our people. When you look at smart manufacturing specifically, and you call it Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing, et cetera, what's the rub? Well, the rub has been that the Industry 4.0 strategy has been technology centric. So I just told you in this last slide about people and processes are most important in having successful journeys forward. Yet what do we talk about? We're talking in general, we talk about technology first instead of talking about people or process first. We also have this common conversation that there's an uncertain business return. We're asking people to bet that this is the right thing to do. There's fragmentation across, and this is what the CESMII platform is trying to accomplish, right? Is to be able to have a common way and a common approach and a common methodology to look at that. And that's the power of CESMII. And I'll skip to the bottom. People just don't know where to start. And so we think about our members and you think, well, I can start by crafting a project, but maybe a project's too big of a step. I don't know how to do an RFP, or I don't want to do an RFP, or it's going to take 1 or 2 years and it's going to be multi-million dollars. And so you kind of go, well, how do I start? Those are kind of some of the lessons that we've learned so far. And so when you take a look at this technology transformation that CESMII's on its journey towards, I would challenge you to think that what's really needed is a new mindset and a paradigm shift to how we look at things. If what you're trying to do is rethink your existing approaches, but using the exact same model that you had before, you're going to wind up with the exact same answer. So sit back for the next 2 slides and listen to kind of the pushback around trying to create a new mindset and a shift to be ready for services that can transform your organization. First thing I would do is have you think holistically. Think about the big system. The new narrative, the new world mindset, this concept that I'm not worrying about an island, I'm not worrying about a cell, I'm not worrying about a work instance. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to create a digital thread of new capability across the entire system. This nice quote from William Gibson, the future is happening now, it's just unevenly distributed, right? We've all experienced that. This holistic thinking can kind of go in the same boat, where we kind of go, well, okay, there's a spot over there and there's a spot over there, and they're kind of all thinking in the proper way, but collectively, it's still a mess. The pieces of the puzzle have not been put together so we can walk together in this journey. And the problem with this is that when you look at closing the gaps on people, process, and technology, there's different methodologies that you're going to need. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Sometimes your process and your path that you're following is the right path, and it's a linear approach. You just need to do more of it. Other times, you don't even have the right capabilities to actually get where you need to get where you need to go. You need transformation. You need some new capabilities added to your stack to be able to achieve the outcome. And when you look at that, when you look at the linear and you look at the new capabilities, the speed of actually making that happen is fast, right? So the speed of the digital world into the physical world can happen fast. And ultimately, you have to address the people side of this and the workforce side of this to make it happen. So think about this new collar workforce where they've grown up, everyone's grown up with cell phones. How can we take the technology competent folks that are coming into the manufacturing floor, unleash that talent, their curiosity, their experimentation, their agility, and unleash that on manufacturing? That's kind of trying to think about this new world and really think about it totally differently. And when you do that, you have this new mindset. And I'm going to talk about this old world, new world, but ultimately it's not either or, it's both. And that's what the Venn diagram is trying to show at the bottom. Yes, we have this VUCA situation, which of the new normal of it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And we have systems and processes that are just fine in the old world. Not everything needs to be ripped down. Not everything needs to be replaced. Some of the stuff is super efficient and has served us well and needs to continue serving us well. And other things need to be rethought. So ultimately, it's not an old world versus new world. It's an old world and a new world, and how you figure out how to put those together. And you look at some of those differences, and this comes into the services side, and this comes into the CESMII mission side. Are you technology centric or are you business centric? Are you inside the walls or are you end to end and there's no walls? Are you focused on your internal rate of return or are you focused on the value that the customer gets? Are you focused as a manufacturing cost center or technology is viewed as an enabler? Are you integrating your supply chain or are you synchronizing your value network? Do you have incremental improvement or are you looking for transformational outcomes? Those are kind of the bumpers, if you will, on the lanes. And it's not an either or, it's an and some businesses, you might be swayed to mostly new world kind of thinking. Other businesses, it might be appropriate to be mostly old world thinking, but you need to be aware that that these are the kinds of things that you're going to be faced with, and that when we take a look at services, we take a look at how CESMII can help you as a member, we got to bounce around between these borders and figure out how we're going to deliver this whole set of capabilities that are on this page. And so what we did was we took a look at those bumper barriers, and we said, okay, how can we make this breakthrough? How can we take those old world and new world ideas and turn that into services that can help you out as a member and give you differential value? Because that's what CESMII asked us to do. And so they're broken down into these half a dozen things, and we're going to talk in detail about a couple of them. So first of all is establishing the narrative, right? So this narrative of old world and new world, this idea that you want to get out of pilot purgatory where you constantly try stuff, but you're never actually able to implement stuff. One of the big things around getting unstuck and getting to move stuff forward is understanding what your gaps are between your business goals and your capabilities. And then having leadership understand the capabilities of technology and actually sponsoring programs. So how do you get your leadership on board with the ideas that you have? So we've heard from members that it's very common to be technical evangelists and not having any of your ideas approved. Well, how well did you convince the folks around you and message those folks and influencing those folks using their terms and their terminology that this is the right thing to do? And so we've got workshops and we've got extended services to reframe the technology, assess your company's ability, provide workshops for your leaders, provide governance for your teams, developing the leadership skills to transform. And then at the bottom, this is really about, can you actually do it fast? So getting people to believe many times means getting to believe by doing. So what could we do using CESMII's toolkit in 90 days in my plant? I would challenge any CESMII member to look at things and say, can I stand up the platform and can I find a problem where I've identified value and beginning to end, it's a 90-day event. That's what we're talking here. We would facilitate that happening. The second thing, a lot of folks really saw a lot of value on, was learning from others. How did so and so do it? What was their issue? And can we have a facilitated discussion, kind of off the record? So I don't want to have a discussion by people sharing their PowerPoints and then it being published, that I respect. Oop, I don't know why that moved. I'm moving it back up one so I can finish that. Maybe I'm moving it up one. Come on, screen. Embedded messaging with technical partners, that is, we don't want to forget about our technical providers that are members, but how can we take the concepts and the collateral that's available from CESMII and get that built into product roadmaps, built into vendor strategies, built into events, built into conferences, where CESMII and the technical partner are aligned, saying the same message, speaking with one voice, etc. And so we did, that's another extended services, and we'll talk briefly about that. And the last thing people have said was, can you help me develop a roadmap? Can you either look over my roadmap and point holes in it and make the roadmap I had stronger, or I don't even have a roadmap. Can you connect the dots for me, and can we collaborate together so we move from the discussion point to actually a tangible working roadmap? So what I'm going to do next, and I'll come back to more of the extended services, but we're going to talk about one in particular, and that's at the top of this stack, where we talk about establishing the narrative and assessing your company's business gaps and related capabilities. And what we did as part of this pilot was we worked with General Mills as a pilot company. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to turn it over to Doug Berger and Chris Damsgard.
Thanks, Jim. You want to move on to the next slide? So at NextGen, we had developed an assessment, and in working with General Mills, we customized the assessment for their particular needs and their particular interests. Most assessments start, as Jim had talked about earlier, with a technology-centric point of view. And people say that the process needs to start looking at strategy, but assessments start with technology. So in developing the A2I2 assessment, we saw the opportunity to start an assessment with a strategic view, where smart manufacturing, or Industry 4.0, is clearly positioned about advancing the business. So when we looked at strategy, we said there are really three major buckets that we want to be assessing. The first is we want to be assessing how the gap to goals. So any manufacturing operation or supply chain operation is clearly going to have 4, 5, 6 strategic goals that it's looking to achieve over the next 3 to 4 years. And we wanted to ask, how well are you doing on closing the gap? Are you on track for closing the gap? And so then we wanted to also look at this question of disruption. And, you know, people are, and when we first started asking this question, people said, why are we considering disruption? And then, of course, COVID happened, and now, you know, going forward in an assessment, if you're not considering disruption, you would be thought of as leaving out a significant portion of the business concern. And the other thing is, are you aware of how the competition is doing? And are you factoring in, if you will, competitive leading practices into the way you're conducting your business? Because if you're not, you're going to get caught short down the road. So we start out with this strategic view in the assessment process. Then we developed a maturity model, and the maturity model is not merely technology centric, but the maturity model is considering things like the maturity of your improvement processes, the maturity of your automation processes, your equipment on the shop floor, the maturity of your workforce development. So that's across the top in the operational dimensions of smart manufacturing. And then we've got maturity levels. And we distinguish Industry 4.0 in a particular way from its predecessor, Industry 3.0. And we consider Industry 4.0 when a company is developing capabilities that are intercompany capabilities in nature. And we consider Industry 3.0 when the company is robustly filling out its internal manufacturing capabilities. And so we've got 6 levels of maturity. And so when you look at that, there's a 6x6 grid that we can assess a company at. And then where we want to wind up is we want to wind up identifying areas to focus, and we want to wind up with an understanding of what is the magnitude of gains that's available for the company in implementing smart manufacturing. And so the platform that we've developed is an online platform. It crowdsources hundreds of perspectives, and it captures granular information by location, because things will vary by plant, or things will vary when you look at corporate versus the plants. We capture information by functional area, and we capture information by organizational level. So it's that granularity of perspective. Jim? Next slide.
Yep.
Chris?
All right. So Chris Damsgard, Principal Engineer at General Mills, where we applied this. And so I'm just going to speak through some of the process, the approach, the context behind this, and really kind of what we did with it. What we won't be sharing is our actual details of what General Mills found. We consider that proprietary. But so as far as the process goes, you know, we first started working with Doug and Jim around this. We had to start at understanding what are we getting into, and reviewing the assessment tool, the question set. There were some pieces that we fill in terms of the question set, but by and large, they were able to bring that whole tool to us. And beyond that, we needed to get to sponsorship. So this kind of socialize, and then the next bullet of sponsorship, that we brought it to a cross-functional team. So we had IT, OT, we had our automation group, we had our data and analytics group, we had our tools group that builds our kind of MES system that's homegrown, to work through the questions with them and make sure that what we were asking was going to get after some of the Industry 4.0 kind of strategies and questions. The disruptors then really were business questions that we asked our sponsor. In this case, we were sponsored by our vice presidents of both engineering and then North American manufacturing. And so as we engage with leadership in both of those areas, looking at, are we asking about the right strategies and how people see and have confidence in the ability to reach those and how they prioritize those. And then what kind of disruptors we want to understand, whether our workforce, our leaders across the supply chain have their finger on the pulse of, and their understanding of how big a disruptor things are likely to be. And so as this assessment then came together with those groups of people, and we took ownership, we inserted our goals, our disruptions into the survey, then it was a matter of how do we get this out and get meaningful results? How do we get participation? If you've ever done kind of these company-wide surveys, the participation can be low depending how you launch it. So working with our sponsors to craft the right messaging around this, to position it among other types of surveys we do, other consultancies we might engage with, all important. This is going to be one more data point, not the only data point. And so we want to make sure we're framing this up well, that people are prepared to think about it and answer these questions. And then at the execution phase, as we move into the actual survey tool and deploying it out to folks, largely through email, broadcast, because we're trying to hit, you'll see here in a minute, we're trying to hit hundreds of supply chain leaders in all of our functions. But we had fantastic turnout. As the results then came back, we spent our time reviewing the results and the insights with the NxGen Group before any kind of release back to our people. We're going to promise to them that you're going to help fill out the survey. We're going to let you know what we're learning and finding from this. And so in our case, that happened to hit as we were going through some other changes. And so I would say we are at the internalized step point, and in the midst of COVID and these things, we need to make sure we're framing it right among all of our other messaging at this time. But out of this, with Doug and Jim being able to look through that raw data and put together a very well communicated report, clear to understand and really visual to see what folks are telling us around our goals, around our disruptors, around our maturity. And so we're at the point now where we can develop that plan of action and take that and really put together a roadmap of what we're going to do going forward. Next slide. So here's kind of the context around this. As I mentioned, our sponsors were VP of Manufacturing and Engineering. He also has responsibility for our environmental and safety functions. We sent this out to 320 participants in the company. This was all really senior supply chain leaders, whether they're from the IT aspect, whether they're from engineering, logistics, operations, and we got a very good turnout. It took some work, right? Any of these, you have to kind of keep it in front of people with everything that's going on. And so we were effective enough to get up to 77% across all of these functions and levels. So everyone from VPs, directors, management, down to the senior staff people and leaders. And a lot of folks, we have fairly low turnover, that we have a lot of folks who've been around a long time and have worked in multiple product lines and businesses at General Mills. And so we got really good perspective from these senior folks in the company. And let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so before I showed you a kind of conceptual framework where we're starting with the gap to goals, we're starting with disruption, we're doing a maturity assessment, and then we're identifying areas of focus and the magnitude of the prize. So I want to just show you some of the reports in the visual format. So I'm going to start in the center for a moment, the maturity model. And if you notice on the maturity model, you can see things that are shaded in blue. In some cases, the blue goes completely across a square. In some cases, it's a fraction of a square. And what the blue is doing down a vertical column, the blue is indicating the distribution of results, how people viewed our current capabilities in a particular operating dimension. So you can see in that first column that the third row is fully blue. That means 50% of people said we fit that category of maturity. Whereas in the top row of that first column, you can see it's about 15, like 1/4 of 1/3 of the way across. Split that in half to be like 12 to 15% of people said that's the maturity we're at. So you can see that most of the people thought that we're around overall level 3 maturity, which in the model is called tactical. And then there's variability around that. We also then said to people, where do you need to be in order to accomplish all your goals? And we got, again, a variability of views from 240 some odd people about where our capabilities needed to be 3 to 5 years out in the future in order to achieve our strategic goal. And you can see that that kind of brackets around that 5th row and maturity, and we call that 5th row adaptable. And what's particularly noteworthy is that the current level of maturity going to the future needed maturity is 2 maturity levels. 2 maturity levels is truly a transformational shift. This is not just a linear change.
And Doug,
So now
Doug, just to be clear, just want to reiterate, this is not General Mills data. This is sample data and doesn't reflect on General Mills at all.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. So when we look at gap to goals, one of the things we looked at is we looked at what's the trajectory that people say the goals are. And again, this is sample data, as Chris indicated. And so for a goal by goal by goal, it could be that we look at that goal and we go, we're going to exceed that goal, down to we're going to fall short, down to we're way off course in achieving that goal. And then we match that up and ask people what approach is being used to close that gap to goal. And we had answers that range anywhere from just keep doing what we're doing now, all right, to advance our continuous improvements efforts, all the way up to we really need new advanced capabilities in order to close the gap. So that's the picture we were able to create around gap to goals, and you can see that directly then relates to the maturity levels that we were talking about. And we did the same thing around disruption. We laid in the specific disruptors that General Mills was concerned about, and we asked what's the impact if that disruption happens, and that impact could be anywhere from kind of minor, spotty impact to manufacturing, all the way up to that could be a game change for the company. And again, we tracked the variability of opinion across the different disruptions. And then we also asked, how are you preparing for disruption? And again, got a variation of opinions, anywhere from kind of we're unaware and doing nothing, all the way up through we're way out ahead of the game in preparing. And so again, the gap to goals and the disruption feeds into and links to the maturity model. And then to really bring things to a focus, we identified 10 specific areas of smart manufacturing focus and asked people to pick what they thought were the top 3 areas that the company should be focusing on. And as a representative example, here's something that the granularity enables you to do. So the granularity in this sample is the orange represents the view of senior executives in this sample data set, and the blue represents the distribution throughout an entire data set. And we can see that executives felt very strongly about 3 areas, but they were not fully in agreement with what the general population thought were the top 3 areas. And that kind of disconnects points to areas where you're going to run into problems implementing things because executive intentions are not being well translated down into the operating areas of the company. And we asked the same thing about the size of the prize. So we said, how big is the gain? And the orange represented the view of the executives, and the blue showed the variability of the cross-section of the entire sample size that we did. Now, down the road, we're going to be building this out as a national benchmarking capability so that we'll be able to show a company where its standing is against a national benchmark or an industry subsector benchmark. Jim? So, you know, data is one thing, and we've all gotten a lot of surveys. And the real value of a survey is not in the information it presents. The real value of an assessment or a survey is it leading to new perspectives, and is it leading to new actions and decisions? So we designed the assessment and the report out to, if you will, be provocative, to tell people what they needed to hear, not what they wanted to hear. And so the first part you can see from the nature of the assessment is we're framing smart manufacturing as a strategic business enabler. We're not framing smart manufacturing as a technology tool. And the second thing is we're saying that you need to aim smart manufacturing to close your gaps. So we're not implying that goodness is raising your level of capability. We're saying goodness is closing your strategic gaps. Goodness is preparing for your anticipated disruptions, and use manufacturing, smart manufacturing, judiciously in order to target the things that are going to close your gaps. So that's what we call reframing smart manufacturing as a strategic business enabler. And we talked about the size of the prize. And Chris, you want to comment on just how big the size of the prize was for General Mills?
I won't give numbers, but it was certainly bigger than a lot of people thought. And there was consensus, which was fantastic to see. It was significant, I'll say that much, that this is an important enabler for us. And that was the learning that came through to the organization, right?
Thanks, Chris. And one of the things that we did and we've learned is to frame the size of the prize against net profit as opposed to against revenue. Because if you frame it against revenue, you know, let's say you've got, you know, a $10 billion company, which General Mills is much bigger than that. But let's say you have a $10 billion company and the gain that people think is 500 million. So that would be 5% of 10 billion. But the net profit of a $10 billion company is more like around 1 billion. So people would then, you look at it and go, wait a second, if I'm making decisions on investments, 5% of revenue, well, I could look at a lot of other ways that I can increase revenue by 5%. But if I'm looking at it and going, wait a second, I can get a 50% improvement in net profit, there are not many things a company can do to get a 50% improvement in net profit. So it reframes smart manufacturing to actually have strategic financial impact, not merely tactical operational value. So then we're looking at, we're not where we need to be. So we're not where we need to be in gaps in achieving our strategic goals. Chris, you want to say anything about that for General Mills?
Yeah, so gaps in prioritization, gaps in confidence that we're going to be able to reach those goals. It's not always perfect alignment across a large organization, even among leadership, and that's important to kind of have an eye towards. One level or another might think that there is alignment, and so this can help surface and really foster some very healthy discussions.
Thanks, Chris. Then I want to just circle back on what Jim said earlier on in the hour, which is there are some goals that you're on track to meet. And when you're on track to meet the goal, fabulous, just keep doing what you're doing or add some incremental improvement activities to that. Then there are other goals, all right, that can be closed through scaling and discipline of capabilities that are in the company but may not be fully implemented. Remember, we said there's this distribution of capabilities. So there are some goals that were identified for General Mills where the goal could be accomplished if General Mills took aspects of the enterprise that were at the lower levels of maturity and just moved them up to higher levels of maturity that were already existing elsewhere in General Mills. And then there were other gaps that could not be accomplished without deploying new advanced capabilities. And the assessment, coupled with the insights that Jim and I were able to bring, puts that in stark relief that for a lot of executives, for a lot of people in companies in general, it's not in stark relief what gaps in your strategic goals you can accomplish with the capabilities you have but need to flush out, and what gap to goals require new capabilities that you won't close the gap without advancing your capabilities. Anything on that, Chris?
Nope. Let's keep going.
Okay, and so by actually having this as crowdsourced information, okay, it's not, oh, the consultant said. Oh, no, it's not that this was interpreted as a single point of information. It's through crowdsourcing the touchy topics, and you can kind of hear the touchiness of some of this in the way Chris is talking about it. The touchy topics become discussable, and the magnitude of the effort and the areas to prioritize are now visible in plain sight. Jim?
So I want to kind of come back to where we started. We started and talked about the pilot going against these 6 elements, the differential value, try it in a few places, and so on. And the gray boxes are really around the capabilities that we've identified. So kind of I'm going to leave you with what we told you. So on extended services, what were the extended services that got a lot of press by the members? This concept of getting executive alignment, we just reviewed this maturity assessment. We talked about smart manufacturing leadership training so that your executives your sponsorships will provide the right level of leadership. Peer-to-peer discussions, quick wins, vendor alignment, which we briefly talked about around integrating the smart manufacturing principles into workshops, into events, into annual conferences that vendors put, road mapping, and then ultimately these partner programs where we're all aligned in sending the same CESMII message on every front. And Conrad's going to talk about more to follow. We touched a lot of bases with a number of different members, but some call outs to some key contributors in this study was General Mills, who you heard about, J&J, ArcelorMittal, and Microsoft. And we figured out a model for CESMII to deliver these services through vetted partners, not just NxGen Group, but through vetted partners, and how these partners can get trained on these CESMII principles and the CESMII tools so that, again, we're speaking with one voice and we got the same oar in the water. What we heard early on from membership as we talked about these extended services bullet points, we saw early excitement about these offerings. We got feedback that it leverages the membership commitment. It entices new members. They said, boy, if I knew all this stuff was coming, I'd probably up my membership to even a higher level. And it's very supportive of what the technology members and why they want to join and what they're trying to get out of CESMII. And lastly, it aligns very tightly with the sustainability plan that the Institute has to be able to have capability and services offered to their members to allow for membership retainment, and also develop for a strong partner network of folks that can democratize the message. And so you think about the challenges of CESMII of trying to address 400,000 manufacturers. You're not going to do that by by one organization, one NxGen Group or one company helping you out. It needs the information and the exchange and the services need to be democratized as well. And so all of this is going to evolve and all this will be refined, but this is kind of at a high level, the body of work that CESMII asked us to do. So I'm going to turn this over back to Conrad for a wrap up and then a quick Q&A.
Thank you, Jim. Well, so let's summarize what we did, right? We're driving value for our members. We engaged with a few of our large members in this pilot, and we are building a network of trusted partners. We did this exercise because we believe that these type of transformational services are needed, because you can't just read about smart manufacturing. Some organizations need that extra hands-on help from subject matter experts and the tools that go with that to help that acceleration. So we want to keep expanding that. We've validated that there's a need for this in the marketplace, and we want to keep expanding that catalog of services. We want to put this CESMII recognized program in place and expand the network of service providers, just like Jim mentioned there, because it's going to take a big ecosystem to accelerate at scale. So our call to action here is that if these kind of services sound interesting to you, if you think your organization is at the right time to get accelerated, please approach us. We want to engage not just large companies, but also small and medium companies. So we might be starting with some large one in these pilots, but we need to prove this out in a little bit smaller companies. So I invite you to engage. And thank you again to all of you, all of the presenters today. Thanks, Jim, Doug, Chris, and we're going to move to the Q&A part of this. I think we still have some time. Mike Yost, do we have some questions queued up?
We do. I encourage anybody, if you have questions, please enter them using the Q&A panel, and we will answer those within the next 5 minutes or so. So one question that came in said that given the menu, how did General Mills decide which type of engagement to pursue? So Chris, are you able to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I can a bit. So we had a lot of dialogue about this. Particularly, I sat down with my engineer vice president, and we talked through some of the options that we found attractive. Going after a quick 90-day win project that aligned with something we were already doing, already funded, so you didn't have to garner resources to pull it off, to show how the technologies of smart manufacturing or Industry 4.0 could come to bear quickly and maybe transformatively on how that project was going to play out versus not doing it. Another approach that he was very interested in was the conversations with peers, a facilitated conversation around these topics. But the thought was really, let's use this assessment as the starting point that could then better inform some of those activities, so that we have a real clear handle on our organization first before trying to jump into one area or another.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Next question is about the climate today. So would this exercise be different now during this disruptive time? So I assume that has to do with COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID. So I don't know if, Chris, you have thoughts, and then the NextGen guys want to?
It certainly would. Unprecedented times, to be sure. So I don't know the exact shape that it would take, but I'm quite certain it would be different. The things that we're concerned about right now are different than they were 4 or 5 months ago, pre-COVID.
Sure. Well, how about Jim and Doug from the process perspective and the way you guys manage the engagement? Would you use any different tools or approaches?
Go ahead, Doug. You're on mute.
Off mute. Yeah. So if anything, it clearly highlights the need to be prepared for disruption. And so one might say that at the outset when we did this, the achieving of strategic goals was of paramount importance, and disruption was a Cinderella stepsister to achieving strategic goals. Now, not just for a company like General Mills, but for any company, the ability to be resilient and prepared for a disruption, not just the, kind of the one we're in the middle of, but likely that there will be supply chain disruptions happening ongoingly down the road, maybe not of the same magnitude as the one we're facing right now. It really ups the level that one has to think preparedly in terms of preparedness. And that changes as well the way that you look at your manufacturing maturity, the way that you look specifically at your ability to manage data and understand your business within the walls. And as we said, Industry 4.0, the way Jim and I think about it, and the way Chris and General Mills think about it, is Industry 4.0 is when you really are moving outside the walls to really be looking at your supply chain. And when you start looking at your supply chain and your capabilities to actually have a supply chain preparedness, you find out that we've been thinking too much inside the walls, and really now need to really be broadening our thinking.
And the thing I would add to what Doug just said was, if I was to redo this survey, retake the survey now after COVID, I think there would be a greater appreciation around the strategic nature of smart manufacturing. I think the size of the prize would have been even bigger, because people have said, oh, I never would have imagined the disruption. I'm not speaking of General Mills as an example, but we have a lot of manufacturers that stopped manufacturing. So they went to zero. I mean, how many people in a survey tool before the virus would put a disruptive event on their radar screen that their manufacturing process essentially gets shut down for a temporary or an indefinite time period? And how do you respond to that? So the other thing is, I think we had 10 areas of smart manufacturing focus. I think potentially the priorities would have shifted. I think in general, the priorities that people selected might have been technology driven. I think now that COVID hit them, the priorities of the smart manufacturing capabilities will be business driven. And so I think the insight of having something as dramatic as this pandemic will have refocused everyone and really, I think, levered it up a bit to make sure that smart manufacturing indeed is a strategic enabler.
Well, folks, thanks. I think we're running out of time. Not sure we have time to answer one more question here before the clock runs out. It's been a great session. If you do have more questions, maybe we'll be able to answer them on a blog post or something along with the recording or in our community. Thank you so much. Anything else last minute for the speakers?
It's all good.
All good. Okay. Well, thank you, Dan. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. This has been a great annual conference, and a reminder to please go and check out all the sessions that have been recorded. Thank you.